Session is with Mr. Param Vir, who is an award-winning opera composer, was been inspired by the Buddhist canon recently, is producing a new opera piece and moderated by Jamshed Bharucha, a cognitive neuroscientist. I will ask them to introduce themselves and take it from there.
Thank you. My name is Jamshed Bharucha, and I'm currently a cognitive neuroscientist at Dartmouth College. But this session is about our guest Param Vir, who is a composer who's written several very serious operas, highest order. Two of them, which I've seen myself, Snatched by the Gods and Broken Strings, were debuted in Amsterdam. They're available on Amazon. I've followed Param Vir's work. I call him Param Vir. Some people might call him Param, but I call him Param. For a number of years, and he is one of the most brilliant people I know, and widely read. He grew up in Delhi, and he got his bachelor's degree in history, and then at St. Stephen's College, and then a master's degree in philosophy, also at St. Stephen's. But was already a very advanced musician, having studied music theory, counterpoint, composition, and then he moved to London to study music composition more seriously, and that's where he's been ever since. This session is about an opera that he's just completed called Awakening, which is about Buddha. And it will be debuted in Bonn at the Theater Bonn on March 1st. And we plan to go for that, hopefully. So you should think about going too. It's commissioned by the Theater Bonn for the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. Beethoven was born in Bonn. And even though this is 250 years later, clearly not in the style of Beethoven, but it is in what we would call today contemporary Western classical music style. And I would characterize Param Vir's style as richly textured and of high complexity. It's the kind of score that could stand the test of time with layers and extremely well thought through. Param Vir collaborated with a librettist, David Rutkin, a British writer, poet. And I think Param Vir and Rutkin have had that collaboration for the previous two operas as well, right?
Yeah.
Which later on I'll ask him to talk a lot about that collaboration, because I can't imagine it's easy. This is a project that I know our speaker today has been thinking about and working in his mind on for decades. He's always wanted to do an opera on Buddha, but to do it in the right way, as he sees it philosophically. And it brings together his deep background in philosophy with his musical training. And he can tell us, as we go along today, how he conceived that and why he conceived that. And he places the opera in the Pali canon, which I have gotten to know since talking to Param Vir about this. The Pali canon is considered the most authentic set of writings about Buddha, written in several centuries after him, but putting down and writing what had been passed along in the oral tradition. And in that intervening time, a lot of scholars had analyzed Buddha's philosophy and his teachings, had distilled them, and the Pali Canon is therefore regarded as the foundational set of writings. So let me start by asking you, first of all, welcome, Param Vir. And why don't you give a synopsis of the opera? And then we'll go from there.
You want my postcard synopsis?
Start with the picture postcard, but then, you know, this is a very sophisticated audience, you know, this is New York. So you gotta go beyond the postcard and tell them about the structure, tell them about what you're trying to communicate, and you should use the mic because
I see.
If it's being recorded, I don't know.
Okay. Well, the postcard is up there, so that takes care of the picture. So people ask me what the opera is about, and I often don't like to say it's about the Buddha, because, it's the Buddha, and then it goes into some kind of slop, you know, new age thinking and something that they remember of what they know of the Buddha. So I say it's an investigation into the thought of an extraordinary man, an extraordinary teacher who lived 2,500 years ago. And he investigated and he brought to the world remarkable ideas about ethical thinking and ethical living at a very high level. And this is shown in his interaction with multiple characters, both human and non-human. There are several non-human characters that sing in this opera. And these were all real encounters with the Buddha. And the piece is encased inside a complex structure which we can talk about later. So, to focus the story of the life of the Buddha is inextricably linked with his teaching and what he had to say, what he had to teach. And so there were many ways in which to look at this work when we were conceiving that. It took 32 years to get to where we are today. 16 drafts of the script itself. The present script is in the 16th state of iteration. And there were various ways in which one can look at this story. And one of the ways which I've tried to formulate this afternoon was really to say what was the Buddha up against at his time. What was the kinds of philosophies he was dealing with at that time? To look at his teaching in the context of his life, the people that he encountered. And it should also be known that India was in I call it India as a modern identity. It was something else at that time. North India, let's say, was in a am I too closer? Okay. So, it was in a very high state of development. There was an extraordinary intellectual development at that time. If you read the discourses of the Buddha and the kinds of conversations he had, it's remarkable how powerful and how insightful and how deep they were. There was a remarkable vocabulary that supported these conversations, and this would have been arrived at in thousands of years of development. This didn't come from the caveman. Suddenly, you have the Buddha. It would have originated over a long period of gestation and development. We know nothing, and I have a big bachelor's degree in history honors from Delhi University, and they never told us the one thing that we should have said, that recorded Indian history really starts with the Pali Canon. The details of it, the rich details, 17 books of the Pali Canon, some of them this thick, printed on thin paper. And today most of that is available for $25 on Amazon. They weren't available so easily when I started this project 30 years ago. So it's a very rich compendium of information and knowledge. So how do we look at this? So one of the ways, of course, was in terms of focusing the story. There are thousands of stories. Which stories should one tell? Which stories should one exclude? And one of the things that I said was to discuss what were the things that challenged him. So I made a little list, and I should probably just refer to it. So when he started on his quest, and we all know, perhaps if you don't know, I can tell you in brief the story of his quest. He was a prince, so it starts with his life as a prince. and he's in fact riding his horse, and his horse takes him to a part of the kingdom which he's not seen before, where he encounters these three beings, if you like, of age, an old person, sickness, a sick person, and a dead person. And I should also point out, since we have discussed the Pali Canon, that this is actually not even canonic. We've been taught these stories as Indians since childhood. It's not true. This did not happen. So where did they come from? The Buddha told us about these encounters, which were encounters experienced 6 Buddhas before him, but not the Shakyamuni Buddha. It is not his experience. So why have we used these characters? Because these are sort of archetypes that run through all of his teaching. He filtered it down to the effects of age, sickness, and death. So the dramatist, David Rudkin, who's a remarkable dramatist, personified them as such. So that is, in a sense, legend, and we've got the legend, and then it gradually slips into the actual historical discourse. So the legend is used very consciously as a theatrical device. And in his encounter with these, as we all know the story, he experiences suffering, and he sees the nature of suffering, or it focuses on him, that there is life beyond the princely palace and people suffer. And so he questions it and he decides to leave the palace. He feels trapped inside almost like a straitjacket, and he starts to write as the banquet music is playing. His son has just been born, and he decides to leave the palace on his horse Kanthak. So the first people that stop him or try to stop him are his father, his mother, his wife. They say, why are you going? So they are the people that stop him. They try to arrest his development. He says no, and he pursues his quest. And then at a certain point, he gets off, he dismounts from his horse Kanthak. That is a canonic character. You'll find it in the dictionary of Pali names. There's a whole history of Kanthak. I'm sure he didn't sing in ancient times, but my Kanthak will sing. He's a tenor, and he sings and he tries to stop the Buddha. He says, I think the story goes that he had to go back to the palace, and the Buddha would not go with him, and he died of a broken heart. So that is the story of Kanthak. So Kanthak stops him, and then come a place where I have 7 priests and philosophers. So there are 7. There were multiple, I think there were as many as 70 false philosophers with extraordinary, twisted, distorted philosophies which you will even find in today's world. And that's one reason why I've got them in my character, because it's not just that happened then, it's happening today, everywhere. So the 7 philosophers, he encounters them. It's too much to go into in detail, but I'll tell you the last one. This was a guy called the amoralist philosopher. I was just playing it to my colleague downstairs, an audio realization of this. And according to this philosopher, there was no good and there was no evil. There were delusions. And he said, and this is a weapon of mass destruction. I think it's the first record of a weapon of mass destruction in an ancient canon. And the Buddha said, and in the canon it describes, with a razor wheel, you go along the banks of the river Ganges and you reduce all of humanity with the sharp wheel to a mass of flesh, and no harm will accrue. Nothing wrong will have been done, because there is no such thing as evil. And you've killed off all of humanity.
So this is one of the philosophers.
This is one of the philosophers.
That Buddha was critiquing.
This is one of the philosophers that the Buddha was up against. And of course he decried all forms of killing, even the killing of bad people. He said everybody had a right to transcend themselves, to transcend what is wrong. So that's the philosopher. So he's opposed by that. And finally, as he reaches the place in the first act, where he sees this beautiful place along the river, and he sees a tree and he says, this is where I can rest, I can be protected, I can have water, there's a village nearby, I can get food. And along comes Mara, the evil one, to tempt him away from that. He said, do good, don't go into the world. You've done good, be a good man, live a good life, you don't need to go any further. And the Buddha powerfully rejects this and then goes on. And at that point, the whole theater is destroyed because there is another structure of story structure working in the piece, which we will talk about later.
A play within the play.
A play within a play.
Let's get to that later, yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that later. And after the Enlightenment, the first person who impedes himself is the Buddha himself. He's become an enlightened Buddha. He sees the nature of the world. And this is a story that's in the Pali Canon. And I've never heard it before until I read it myself. And it's a beautiful story. Without this story, there will be no Buddhism today. So the Buddha said, the world is blind. People will never understand this extraordinary state that I've experienced. So I will retire from the world. I will live in seclusion. And then there was a character, a being of great light called Brahma Sahampati, who lived in a very high heaven, who saw on earth this thought in the Buddha's mind. I don't know how he saw it, maybe he had remarkable powers. And he said, the world will be lost. And he came down through all the heavens and all the worlds and manifested with light around him, fell on his feet on the ground, folded his hands and said, Blessed One, you cannot retire from the world. You must go into the world and teach. And the Buddha said, how can I teach them this? They will not understand. He said, no, you must go. So he pleaded with him. He said, some of them have got not too much dust in their eyes. And they can learn. So twice the Buddha silently refused. The third time he said, go into the world and teach. And then the Buddha said, very well, in your honor and out of respect for you, I go to beat the drum of deathlessness in a world gone blind. And we need that drum of deathlessness today too, because our world is about as blind as then, if not even worse. And the deathless state, of course, is the state of Nibbana, as it's called in the Pali Canon, or Nirvana in the Sanskrit tradition, is a state of enlightenment. That was the ultimate goal, because it's the state where you have no further suffering. So that is the focus. So in the second act then, we have the enlightened Buddha, and again we had to choose stories, and I decided to choose 10 or 11 stories after the story of the celestial to focus the Buddha's teaching. And in many places he was challenged. He was challenged. It's not like a soupy, nice philosophy of do good in the world, you know. It was a very, very powerful philosophy. It's a very powerful intervention. He was what you today call a disruptor. The ultimate disruptor. So the plowman comes and tells him, I plow the world, I work with metal, I plow the world, I plow the earth, you know, I win, I thresh the crops, what do you, I feed the world with my labor. What do you do? What do you do, holy man? You know, what good are you to the human? You know, we can't. So the Buddha said, well, I light the way to those who are lost. I have found out the way to end human sorrow. That is what I teach. And then he tells us formally the four noble truths and the eightfold path, which are the crux of Buddhist teaching. That there is suffering, there is a way to end suffering, and the way to end suffering is through the eightfold path. So that is the first challenge he has. Very soon after that, he has a second challenge, which was from his own foster mother. His birth mother, Queen Maya, died in childbirth. Immediately after giving birth, she died. And he was brought up therefore by his father's second wife. Mahapajapati Gautami was her name. Very beautiful name. We just call her Sister Gautami, or Lady Gautami, because it would be a bit of a tongue twister for a Western singer, I think. But Mahapajapati Gautami, and she wanted to join the order, but she couldn't, for the age-old reason, because she is a woman. So she pleaded with the Buddha, and he refused her 3 times. So finally she went, and this story is told. So she comes on the stage and sings this aria, sings this song, about how she approached the Buddha with tears in her eyes, barefooted, and he refused her. And then she went to Anand, his half-brother, who was Mahapajapati Gautami's son. And Anand went to his mother and said, look, you suckled him at your breast. How can you refuse to help her? And are women incapable of enlightenment? He asked the Buddha that. The Buddha said, no, of course they are capable of enlightenment because they are human beings. So then he had to absolutely relent. So he did. He relented and he permitted her to join, but she sings this aria with such love and such kindness. It's a very beautiful story. So that's another encounter. So these were the encounters in which he was challenged. He's challenged by Angulimala. I'm sure you know that story of the man who was killing people. He was on a killing spree. He wanted, and every person he killed, he would chop off their finger and make a necklace around himself and wear a necklace. It was called Angulimala, finger necklace. And he sees the Buddha coming down the road. He says, aha, my next victim, my 1000th victim. And the Buddha is completely unperturbed. And according to the Pali canon, the Buddha did some kind of magical slate, some magical effect, that he was always ahead of Angulimala, and Angulimala tries to catch him, and the Buddha is walking very slowly, and Angulimala cannot catch him. So finally, Angulimala screams at him and says, stop, I want to kill you. And the Buddha turned around and said, you stop. You stop all the killing, all the murder, all the violence. Shall we tell that to today's dictators? We should. Yeah, that's what somebody should do to them. So we tell them, you stop. And he raises his sword to kill. And he's just overcome by the sheer power of this man who is completely unafraid of him. And very gradually, on a timpani roll, a drum roll, which lasts about 30 seconds, he lowers his hand and he falls on his feet and begs for forgiveness and is transformed. So that was the challenge of Angulimala, where the Buddha was able to do that. I wouldn't try it myself. And then we have the vexed monk. Mallinkaputta was his name. And he accosted the Buddha, he joined the order and he said, Blessed One, I need to know answers to my questions. Is the world finite or is it infinite? Is soul one and is body another, or are they all the same thing? And after death, does the Buddha exist or does he not exist? Or does he both exist and not exist at the same time, or neither? If you can't answer these questions, I'm going to leave the order. And the Buddha just replied in a very gentle way. All of his replies were respectful, kind, and loving. And he said, you lie bleeding on the field of battle. There's a poisoned arrow stuck inside your chest. And they bring the surgeon to pull out this arrow, but you say, no, you can't pull out this arrow. First you must tell me who fired this arrow. What clan was he from? What was the color of his skin and the color of his hair? And the arrow itself, where did that come from? What was the feather at the end? Which bird's feather had been used at the end? And so on and so forth. I want all these answers before I will allow the arrow to be removed. And the Buddha explained this. So Mallinkaputta said, by then, sir, I would be dead. So the Buddha said, yes. So his point obviously being that these are irrelevant and silly questions which have no bearing on the main purpose of his teaching, which is to bring about joyfulness and to end suffering. So that was Mallinkaputta. So these were the focus points around which the story was organized. And beyond that, more positively, there was just the teaching itself, which is of course there in these stories too. But the teaching comes from, there's a whole theme running through the work of what is called the rose apple tree. It's such a beautiful title. In fact, one of the sections of the opera is called the Rose Apple Tree. So let me tell you, if I may. May I tell you the story?
Yes, please.
The Rose Apple Tree. So when he was a boy of 4, his father took him to the threshing place where they were threshing and they were harvesting. It was the harvesting season. and they sat him under the rose apple tree. And the sun was hot, and he was sitting there under the tree, and suddenly, on his own, spontaneously, he attained a very high, extraordinary experience of upliftment. It wasn't enlightenment, but he was in a state of absolute rapture and joy. It was like a foretaste, maybe, of enlightenment. And then he came out of it, and suddenly it was all normal again. So this story, he tells us in the beginning of the opera this story himself, the man who's playing the part of the Buddha, the prince. So he describes the process of enlightenment. I have to make a little digression here, because we come to the question of what is impossible to tell in the story of the Buddha. So when I approached David Rudkin, the genius playwright, he's now nearly 90 years old. He started this opera when he was 30 years ago. And he said to me straight away, there are two problems with this opera that you want to write. Okay, he tried to dissuade me. Maybe, I don't know. One of them is, how do you tell on the stage what is enlightenment? It's an internal process. It's not a man sitting cross-legged with his hands in this position and his eyes shut, and then suddenly wakes up and there's wonderful lights going on in the background, says, I'm enlightened. I'm sure you'd all start to giggle. You won't believe it. It's silly. And secondly, a very more pertinent question, how can an actor act the part of an enlightened man, having no experience of it in his life? You might well ask the third question, how dare I write this opera? I'm not enlightened. So how do you solve this problem?
So why don't we pick up on your question? Why do you dare write about it? How did you start thinking about Buddha? And you've studied philosophy, or you've read, a lot of great teachings. Why did you pick the teachings of Buddha?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. When I was 18 years old, and I was in St. Stephen's College, in the reserve section of the library. Are there any Stephanians here? I'm not sure. Anyway, it was a reserve section where you cannot borrow the books, you can only look at them in the reserve section. And I just opened this book randomly, and I saw this text. I don't know what it was. It was something profound about the Buddhist teaching. And I looked at it and said, my God, I've never seen anything like this. This is absolutely incredible, and it struck me. But reading the Pali Canon, and by the way, I did have imposter syndrome all through the writing of this work. How dare I write a work like this? But better to do it well than to not do it at all. And I have the Buddha's permission to do this, and I'll tell you why. Because there's another story. So many, I can't stop telling stories. So the story is that he was asked by one of his student disciples, tell us about the previous Buddhas, and did their teaching survive their death, or did it not survive? So he said yes, and he gave us the name of 3 of the previous Buddhas, centuries before, whose teaching survived, and 3 whose teaching died with them. And he asked them, and they asked him, well, why did the teaching die? He said, because they just had their own followers, and when they died, it was over. The other 3, they allowed their teachings were translated into music and drama and poetry and art and so on, and so the teaching persisted. So I think that I'm allowed to write an opera about it, and my hope, of course, is also to tell stories that nobody even knows. I actually personally have never met an Indian. I've lived in India for most of my life before I came to London, and who knows what is the Eightfold Path. Knowing the Buddha doesn't mean having a bust in your drawing room or in the restaurant. A bust. Can you tell us what is the Eightfold Path? It's the simplest thing that you should know. Yeah. So I think that bringing this and bringing the Eightfold Path and presenting it powerfully was an important reason for writing the work.
So you said that Buddha said that the previous Buddhas, some of their teachings did not survive and some did, because they were able to communicate it. And wasn't that in the oral tradition? And is that why?
Apparently not.
Okay.
The oral tradition, I don't know what is I think the Buddha's teaching is the oldest oral tradition there is. There was, when he died, it was, he had, he was enlightened around about the age of 36 and he lived to the age of 80. And all of that time he walked along North India teaching. So there's so much information and we know so much about him and what he said to various people. So people saw the stature of this teaching. They said, we cannot allow this teaching to be lost. We have to preserve it for future generations. And there was no writing implemented at that time. The paper was not, you couldn't write on any paper. There wasn't any paper as we know it today. Papyrus, yes. So for 500 years it was transmitted. 500 monks apparently, all of them who had worked with the Buddha for 6 months, I think, recited all the stories. And it's the greatest act in history of word processing without computers. Thousands and thousands of discourses and 17 books of the Pali Canon, 3 of whom that were consulted on this work. The Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, they are short discourses, not too short, but telling quite wonderful stories. Then the Digha Nikaya, where he tells us about his lineage and so on, where he tells us about the false philosophers, extraordinary. And of course the numerical discourses. The numerical discourses, if people knew even one of these hundreds of numerical discourses, they're organized around numbers. So if you knew the 4 tests of human character, if you knew that before you get married, it'll half the rate of divorce, I think. For sure. Because I had a Chinese lady as a lodger in my house, and she came back one day and said, I've dumped my boyfriend because he didn't pass the Buddha's 4 tests.
So you see yourself then as a composer using music to perpetuate the teachings and so that they won't die.
Well, a 9-year-old this morning asked me a question, which I'm going to tell you. The question is...
let him ask it. Are you the 9-year-old? What was your question?
Speak at your voice. Stand up and speak at your voice.
What's music?
What's music?
Yeah.
Well, it stopped me. I actually said to him, can you ask me a question to which I don't know the answer? Well, I sort of did know the answer, but I had to think about the answer before telling the answer. And I formulated this answer right there at the breakfast table. I think that answers your question too. And that is that, what is music? It's the highest, for me and for any serious composer, I would say, it is your highest it's not expression, it's your highest interaction with the universe through the medium of sound to inspire and to uplift. If you can't do that, you're not a composer, in my view. You're not worth listening.
Very profound. So a couple more things before we go to the Q&A. You have the libretto, which is a work of literature, and you have the music. Talk briefly about how you were able to get those two synchronized and what some of the issues were, including the collaboration with the librettist.
Well, David Rutkin comes from the theater of poverty, and he was an essential collaborator in this work. Without him, this stature of this work would not have been there. And I would say that he drew out for me the best music I've ever written. And it's also the longest work I've written. At 3 hours and 10 minutes long is the whole score, maybe a bit longer than that. And I've cut it down now for this premiere to 2.5 hours, because there are reasons why you can't go over that time limit. But originally the work is 3 hours and 10 minutes long. We didn't talk about the play within a play structure.
Yeah, talk about that.
So that's something which, in fact, I wanted. I wanted the distancing. First of all, the Buddha was a personage that lived 2,500 years ago. Is there a way to bring him into the modern world and make him relevant to you and to I in our present day world? without referring to our own political tensions and social tensions that all societies suffer from. And so the idea of the play within a play came up, and of course, I should confess that I used to escape from school sometimes and go to the Tibetan dhaba to have Tibetan noodles, which was about 3 minutes walk from my house. There was a big Tibetan shrine there on the river, Jamna River, and the Tibetans used to live there. And it was more than just about the noodles eventually. I'm not talking the noodles feature in this work. But it's a besieged community, a community that's been brutalized, and there are many communities in the world like that, in the past and today, that are brutalized by an occupying force. And I felt that the test of the Buddha, to put it in such a hostile, almost dystopian environment, you require 17 checkpoints before you can get into Lhasa. And young Tibetans self-immolate themselves. I don't know if all of you are aware of this. Yes. Young people, sometimes even old people, to pour petrol on yourself and set yourself alight, they don't call it suicide. And they don't go around killing other people. Immolate themselves, they don't even cry when they do that. Don't know what kind of courage this is, but they call it, I light a lamp for my country and my language and my culture. And inside this world, they enact the story of the Buddha as an act of defiance. And I have to bring in here, I got this text last night from David Rutkin, the playwright, and I must read out a short part of this, which will tell you and inspire us in this. So, in fact, we call it a dramatic poem. It's not just a libretto. It's a dramatic poem. It has profound dramatic structures. A lot of the text is in iambic pentameter. And at its core, this is what David wrote for me, so I'm going to read it out to you on his behalf. At its core is a play being presented by an underground theatre company in a clandestine venue, in a context of murderous cultural repression. The company's play enshrines to preserve them the teachings of their great culture's great founder 25 centuries before. The inner performance of this play within the play has historical exemplar. In 1940s, Nazi-occupied Poland, in the city of Krakow, an underground troupe of actors, the Theatre of Rhapsody as they were called, made it their mission to memorize between them the major works of Polish literature and to give clandestine recitals from these in secret venues, while in the streets around them those very books were burning. On one occasion, in a blacked out upper floor apartment, a young member of the company, later to become Pope John Paul II, began to recite the prologue to a Polish national epic. A loudspeaker attached to the wall suddenly crackled into life to announce the latest names of citizens arrested and shot. And my play, our opera, David and my opera, opens with the director of the play inside the play, welcoming you to the theatre, and says, I'm going to read, this is the only part of the libretto I'm going to read. Good friends, welcome. Thank you for risking the journey to our theatre. In this new time of tyranny and lies, through streets where every wall has eyes, you thread your way to this clandestine place. Theatre, I call this, more an empty space, and secret company of actors, each a memory. And around the space, the company is silently gathering, all anonymous in their long modern overcoats, headwear and the like. Who hold between them all that our great teachers spake, so of themselves his living library make. Why need we do this? Well, you understand. The flames you see outside are our books burning, our temples too, our seats of learning, by edict of that foe who now possess our land. As though amid encroaching night, around this candle of our teacher's light, in challenge to the tyranny of hate and strife, we act the course and meaning of his life.
Well, thank you, Param Vir. personally can't wait to see the inaugural performance in Bonn. I've looked at the score. It's an extremely complex orchestral score, and I'm sure the conductors and the players are practicing it even now, getting ready for March. But why don't we open it up for questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Where is the opera going to be premiered?
In the Opera House at Bonn. It's called Theatre Bonn.
Okay.
Germany.
It's
Yeah.
on the banks of the River Rhine. You might even find the Rhine maidens swimming there from Wagner's opera.
Are you going to be traveling after
I beg your
that?
pardon?
Are you going to be traveling after premiere and Bonn
Are you
performance?
going to be traveling?
Will it travel?
Oh, the opera is not going to travel. No, it's going to be in Bonn.
It could
You
be
have to
arranged
travel.
if a daughter is arranged.
If anybody has a few millions, you can bring it in to New York.
This performance was commissioned by the Theatre Bonn. So they paid for it. I mean, being an orchestra, is not cheap, and so yes.
I wanted to ask, you started the question of how do we depict enlightenment on stage? Did you get to a...
Yes, and that was one of the reasons why we had the structure of the play within a play. So the person that the act 2 starts with the actor who plays the Buddha. He's called the player Buddha, not the Buddha, the player Buddha, and he's looking at this text which he has received from Mr. So-and-so, and he's got to learn how to read it, how to interrogate it. Just as I, as the composer, got this, I told David Rucker, David, I can compose everything, but I can't compose this piece, this section. I don't know what is it like to be an enlightened person. I even said, can we ask Sir Ian McKellen, who is my favorite actor, who acts Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, say, can we'll pay him maybe, and ask him if he could read it, because a great actor could perhaps do it, And David said, no, you have to find it within yourself. I got to it very late, I can tell you that.
So you got around it by not actually having an actor depict Buddha, but you had an actor depict
the actor trying to play the Buddha, or trying to understand the Buddha.
Okay.
And at a certain point, he goes to the 3 watches of the night, basically performing the text, looking at the lines. Should I sing it this way? Should I sing it that way? And so he's sort of performing a performance. So he's not the Buddha, but at a certain point, he puts on the mask, and he becomes the Buddha. It's a moment of conjunction, and there was some conjunction between the outer play and the inner play.
So, Param Vir, first of all, thank you so much. My name is Kedar. So you really got us excited about the whole thing, and I was kind of searching on YouTube with your name and Life of Buddha if I could find some snippets, but I couldn't. But we really wish we could hear some samples of it. And ultimately, the goal is I hope we see your opera at the Met Opera sometimes in upcoming years. That would be wonderful. Because it has such a universal appeal.
Well, I think it's a work that should be seen for the content of what it's about. It's a very remarkable teaching, and I should answer another question of yours earlier, that why did I write this work? Well, I'm not expecting everybody to go off after seeing my opera. It's right, I'm going to practice, I'm going to a cave and practice for 6 months meditation, I'll become enlightened, The Buddha had a halfway house. There are thousands of stories where you read and you say, wow, I can apply this to my life right now, tomorrow, today, tomorrow. You don't have to be an enlightened Buddha. He called it becoming the superior person. And there are many descriptions of what he called a superior person, a person who is living life in a conscious way. A person who is incapable of violence, incapable of harming anybody. A person who's worked through his or her negative experiences, whatever they may be, and come to a state of deeper realization without having necessarily become the Buddha or become a Buddha. So that was another reason.
Yeah, so we will really look forward to that. And I had one more thought.
Yes.
So when you mentioned about Buddha's teachings, and people kind of, it's not written. It also kind of brought me another thought, like this famous poet, right, Kabir. like his poems were never written, like, and they got so popular, like people used to just hear them and they just sing and make songs out of it, and that's how it kind of propagated throughout the world. And I think that thought is wonderful, like the teachings of Buddha and Kabir's poems, they were never written, but they just got propagated through word of mouth and songs and things like that. So I think that's a wonderful thing.
Well, the moment you add color and sound, and the moment you add pitches and you start to add songs, they are easier to memorize.
Right.
And in fact, the Pali Canon had a lot of poems in the Pali Canon were poems, And in fact, I asked David Rudkin to make the opening with rhymed meter. In fact, some of it's iambic pentameter, so it's easier. You hear it differently and you remember it differently because it's got repetition and rhyme, iteration.
Right. Awesome. And one last thing, like, do you have any sample that you can play for us? I mean, from any of the parts?
I considered that, but there wasn't enough time. I do have audio samples done by a computer generator that generates the score. I have the score here, so if you can read the score, you're welcome to look at the score.
Wow.
Oh, you could play some for him afterwards.
Awesome.
Maybe, yeah, if you have time, sure.
He can play some here on the computer.
May I ask one question? You said you've been working on it for 30 years. Do you consider it complete now? You're finally happy with it, both of you?
I think probably I'll tinker with it until I'm dead, I've just got the score and I've been marking it. Oh, I can add something here and I can put more color there and that's too much and that should be drop that bar there and so on. But yes, it's complete. And but right now I've got to make some new configuration which the directors asked me to do. So I'm doing that. So I've still got work to do. And then the process of producing it, the orchestral material is very complicated. It's a very complex work. And there's thousands of notes, all of which have to be proofread. Because I write in pencil. Everything, I don't believe in working on a computer. I write with pencil. So there's no electronic interface between me and the work. In my music room, there's just a gigantic 2.5 meter long desk and a piano, nothing else, no electronics. Write by hand, I take a photograph and send it to the copies and they put it on. And then if I make any changes, which I do from time to time, I send the revised photograph and the copies put it on the computer. So it's an ongoing process right now, but it's so huge.
And remember, these 30 years, artists have to get the commission. So there's a lot of legwork involved. I recall Param Vir going through several years of approaching this opera company, that opera company, and two issues that he's talked about. One is, of course, it's an expensive thing to produce full orchestra and a cast of actors and conductors and so on. But also, he had a very high standard for conditions that he would accept. A lot of people might have been interested in some kind of popular, mushy kind of thing about Buddha. I want to make it very popular. But the Bonn organization responded to his sense he wants it to be high art.
And I should actually tell the story of why they took it on. Because when I pitched the opera, this production to them, I met the visionary director of the opera house. Bonn is the city of Beethoven, and I visited it when I was 19 years old. And I even went to the Beethoven house and I played on his piano. You can't even touch it today, but I was able to play on his piano and play the Tempest Sonata. And I said to her, the intendant, that the opera, now we sort of got lost a bit there. We talked about this besieged community, okay? By the way, I don't call them Tibetans, but they are, that was the origin of the idea. So I hope, my wish certainly is for all communities that are brutally besieged, whether today or in the past, that they will find freedom from oppression. And for a long time, until the fifth draft, it all ended in death. Everybody was killed by the bombings, It just destroyed, the landscape becomes dystopian, and only one person, the guy that plays the Buddha's son, is now a young man. He looks at there, oh, there's India, I can go there, And I thought, I was very uncomfortable. What kind of metaphor is that for the Buddha's teaching that everybody is dead at the end? And then came something very remarkable, which affected me very deeply, was the Syrian revolution. And it was in the Middle East, many people started to say, we don't care, we don't want this oppression anymore, and they were willing to be killed. It of course went very bad, and it did not have a good result. But I said to David, all that needs to happen is that our besieged community, at the end of the opera, turns around and says, right. They stand up and they sing the Pali Canon, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and they walk into the bullets, they are shot down, they get up again, and they are shot down, and they get up again. They can't be stopped. And they sing that, and I said, that's a contemporary ode to joy from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the humanity of all human beings. And the intendant said, I want this for the Beethoven year. So thanks to Beethoven and that connection, the city of Bonn took it up. Sadly, the country that I live in did not, was uninterested. They had other fish to fry, presumably. So that's how the work came to be, and that's the end of that whole oppressive structure. It comes to an end in a joyful, powerful, exultant recitation of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And the last line is, we can transform. And the whole teaching of the Buddha was about transformation.
I don't want to assume, but the opera is written in English, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So would they have subtitle, whatever they're called?
There'll be subtitles in English and German.
In German.
I strongly believe in people being able to understand the language.
Yeah, because I know that he and David Rudkin have worked closely. Every note, every word, every bar, they thought about. So I personally have a hard time understanding the words when they're sung. So that'll be great.
His language is very remarkable, actually. If you've know any of his plays, it's a very unusual use of language. It's a very stylized use of language. It's not conversational, normal conversation, but it's easy to understand. You only have one chance to hear it. You can't turn the pages back and say, oh, I want to hear that bit again. Because you're in the theater, you get it or you don't get it, Of course, now we have the screen. Plus, it affects the orchestration because, you can have a powerful climax and you have to design this with the template, You design it with the template so it comes down, and in the trough, you can put the words, the singing. So that you can have powerful climaxes, powerful orchestral moments, and they don't drown out the voice because the voice comes just after the climax or before, or whatever, So it's all that's part of the auditory design. It sounds very intellectual, but the musical design, of the score.
Well, on that note, thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bharucha, for moderating the session. And of course, to you, Param Vir, coming all the way from London. As you can begin to see at IAC, we really are hunters. We go, we find these jewels. I do want to provide a personal note on Buddha. We at IAC, every year, we try to find an author that can talk about Buddha. And every year we wonder, what else? And like magic, an avatar appears, and we are able to tell the story of Buddha. Why are we so passionate? Why am I so passionate about it? And I just want to have you walk away with this for a moment. I was one of two people who was very fortunate to play a critical role in bringing the Dalai Lama to the United States for the first ever time. And that historic visit led to him meeting the President of the United States, and then of course history was made. So it's very personal to me. Why? Our chairman, Dr. Nirmal Mattu, has given a mission to IAC, which is bring the highest and best of India to America, because the rest they have their own, right? They don't need to hear average stories. And I have taken that mandate in the following way. I think the first great idea of India is in a world that says, follow my God or else. And India's answer was, hey, can we all just get together and take a deep breath in and a deep breath out? Can we agree to that? You are already breathing. I'm not asking you to do anything different. Let's just start doing deep breathing. It was a very profound idea. And today the world is embracing yoga. The second idea of India, we owe to the Buddha. See, ahimsa and compassion were predated Buddha. But Buddha was radical. Buddha was radical when he said that this abstract idea of non-violence, of compassion, this can become the basis for daily life. And if you make it part of your daily life, not only are you going to become a wonderful human being, not only is your world going to become a wonderful world, but it is the pathway to profound, profound beauty, joy, happiness. And so, I'm so happy you came, Param Vir, because you are taking that message of the Buddha, you're bringing it to the world. Let us dream that one day we will join hands and we will bring this opera, we will make it happen in New York. But until then, let's all go to Bonn and be there for the opening. Thank you.